Good morning. I'm here this morning with Sandra Tibbles and Daniel Sobel. They are global experts in inclusion. They've been working with head teachers and school leaders around the globe for a long time, working on inclusion practices and how we can make schools somewhere that children feel more safe and more welcome so that they are able to learn successfully, putting well-being and child-centered practice at the heart of schools. And what we're doing this morning is taking those ideas outside of the school environment and empowering parents to develop strategies that will support their children to learn more successfully wherever they are, whether that continues to be in school or whether it's outside of the mainstream, and even at home and at the weekend, wherever children are learning, which is just about everywhere. So what we're going to do this morning, I'm going to introduce Sandra and Daniel, and they're going to tell you a little bit about their journey through education and what brings them to be here talking with me today. And then I will do the same. And we will cover quite a lot of ground, hopefully. So if you have any questions that come up, obviously feel free to get in touch with us and we can continue the conversation. So I'm going to introduce Sandra first. Welcome, Sandra. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing here today.
Hey, thank you, Kate. So my name is Sandra Tibbles. I'm a distinguished fellow of the International Forum of Inclusion Practitioners, and I also chair the International School Principals Forum within IFIP. I work with schools, as you've said, all over the world, so in the UK and also overseas, to support all aspects of inclusive practice. And that could be that I work within mainstream, I work within specialist schools, and I've also set up my own school actually previously, which was a social emotional mental health setting. So working alongside therapists to support emotional regulation strategies and to support the well-being of young people so that actually they're in a position to be able to access the world and to learn. Because obviously we all know that when we feel more regulated and more understood and emotionally safe, then we're able to cope with a great deal more. And the same applies to learning and to going out there into the world and exploring the world. If we don't feel emotionally safe and supported and people aren't relational with us, it's a lot harder. So it's to bring some of that expertise from within education and within sort of the therapy fields that I've worked to try and support parents. And I'm finding in the UK that I'm being asked to do that more and more actually. And I'm working with a number of parents to support their children perhaps who are struggling to access mainstream curriculums or struggling to access school post-COVID, and actually to provide alternative routes to support their education, which is why I'm particularly interested in partnering in this way, because experiential learning and learning through other aspects of engaging with the world is particularly interesting to me in my work. So that's a bit about me.
Thank you. Daniel?
Hi, everybody. Firstly, I'll declare that I'm a parent of 3 children under the age of 10. And so I have real lived experience. I know that Sandra does as well, but I'll just sort of mention that I know how difficult and challenging it can be to be a parent, and I don't profess to be anything other than just a normal, average human being, that flawed like everybody else. Over the course of my career, I've been influenced by the fact that I didn't do well at school, and I had undiagnosed special needs, but managed to do well, I suppose. In the end, I did a master's in education psychology and also master's in psychotherapy and also a doctorate in education psychology, and working with schools, and got into school leadership myself and won some awards. And eventually I set up a practice helping schools, and my team and I have worked with about 10,000 schools in the UK. And I wrote 3 best-selling books, which are sort of hanging up behind me. I speak around a lot, and I set up something called the International Forums of Inclusion Practitioners. And we're now in about 126 countries, and we're partnered with the European Union and with UNESCO and so on. I think I'm in this conversation partly because I'm a fan of Kate McAllister and the Hive and what they're doing, to the extent that I'm interested in bringing my children to experience it. The second is because there's a lot of knowledge and information which we have within the world of schools that doesn't seem to get translated into what parents could really do with. I've spent part of my career in training teachers and schools and even governments in helping them understand children and what children need and how to communicate with them and so on, how to communicate effectively with them. And so actually myself and Sandra, I think it's fair to say, is that we're by no means could be described as family therapists or parenting experts, but we are, I think, through our life experience and our professional experience, have a huge amount of expertise with regards to supporting children and supporting adults in communicating with children. So I think, although there are many different aspects of family life, that's the sort of the main location and the main focus of our work. I'll pause there because I think we're going to get on to details, aren't we, Kate?
Yes, I'm sure that we will. And so, as you probably know, I used to be a teacher, taught for about 15 years in secondary schools, and very quickly became fascinated with the learning process. I almost instantly realized that learning isn't just about teaching, it's about what's going on inside of the learner, all the things that we can't see that create barriers to them being able to successfully take on board and process what we want them to learn. And so that led me down a journey of understanding how we think and how we develop when we're children, and how our emotions and feelings can impact on how we perceive the world and how we experience the world, and whether that's a positive thing or a challenging thing. And it gradually led me all the way along the spectrum, from traditional mainstream education through school leadership roles, trying everything I could to change things on the inside, developing a curriculum called the Learning Skills Curriculum with Dr. James Mannion. He did his PhD on it, and we wrote a book called Fear is the Mind Killer. And it's all about how you can set up your curriculum and your school for success, for children feeling included and feeling confident and developing the skills for them to be independent. And I did that for a few years, and then slowly moved a little bit further up the spectrum, out of mainstream, off the map, and into the world of alternative education, where I suddenly got to spend a lot more time with families, and got to build a much stronger relationship with parents and children. And it forms this really neat triangle where you really understand one another and what you need and what the challenges are. And I think that's missing a lot in mainstream school. And parents, I've found, often don't have the information that would help them. And we have information that could make it easier for them to parent, and could make it easier for children to express what's going on for them when they're at school. And we don't quite do a good enough job. So I'm really interested in developing shared language so that children can talk to us about how they're feeling, so they can talk to their parents about how they're feeling and what they're doing, and that it's understood. And you would think that that might come naturally, but it doesn't always. We don't always have words to describe what's happening. So a large part of what I'm doing is developing this shared language around self-regulation, around how to manage your nervous system, kind of self-awareness and self-regulation and self-management and self-expression, and all of that stuff about the self that enables you to become a more self-determined human being. That's kind of the goal, is that young people can grow up to be able to meet their own needs, to recognize when they have a need, and to know how to explain that need, and to know what to do about when they notice that there's a lack in their lives. So it's not really what they do with their lives is not up to me to decide, but I want them to be able to have the how. I want them to be able to get to where they want to be in life. And so that's why I'm really interested in talking with more and more practitioners who want to work with parents, who want to kind of build this web of support. So I'm a parent too. So I have one neurodivergent child and one neurotypical child, and have had my own diagnoses in adulthood as well. So it's been a really interesting journey for me personally. And I know that the more I know, the more information I have, the safer I feel, the more confident I feel to try things and to figure out what works for me. So that's why I'm here today talking with you. And why we're going to do something. Sorry, go on, Sandra.
No, I love what you were saying there. I just wanted to pick up on one of the aspects that you said, if that's okay, because you were talking about the how, that actually we need to discover the how. And I think that the piece of the puzzle, for want of a better word, sometimes is also the why. So in order to be able to identify the how, sometimes, not every time actually, because actually we don't always know the why. So that this is a bit ambiguous, but actually I think sometimes that why am I doing it this way can help with the how to do it. And I feel as though that's the bit really as well, where perhaps being able to use some of the knowledge that's come from working within the educational sector can really support parents, because parents can be really intuitive about their children. They can know their children really well, or they can know how their children present in a situation really well, but perhaps they have a great understanding of that. And so parents, and again, I'm also speaking from experience, because I have similar to you, Kate, my son is neurodivergent. I'm not sure about the whole neurotypical, but my daughter has certainly mastered and coped better within education, and adapting to the environment of what is being asked of her, certainly. And now I've lost my train of thought, but I think I was sort of saying that the why is a helpful piece of the puzzle, because and also the language, you talked about the language from, and the language changes constantly. It changes constantly, but actually what I'm finding I'm doing with schools is looking at some of the practices that are in place and the things that are written about children. And I'm actually changing some of that language to certainly be far more, I think, far more positive and far more, let's identify the strengths. And I think sometimes parents are very good at saying, oh, my child is struggling with this. I recognize my child is struggling with this, understandably, but actually it's also giving parents some power and some autonomy and some opportunities to say, but my child might be struggling with this in this context, but actually look at the strengths, look at and trying to sort of almost, I'm sure this is quoting someone else, but flipping that narrative to being, let's look at the strengths and let's look at what the possibilities are, because I think that's what's possibly been lacking, and where parents lose a bit of confidence is that they can recognize the bits that aren't going right. Oh, and the other thing, sorry, just I know I'm waffling, but parents also tend to make adaptations in family life without even realizing that is what they're doing. So we are all adapting to every situation, circumstance, context, but actually as a parent, sometimes we're modifying things all the time, and it becomes normalized to us as a family, because that's family life, right? But actually it's then having perhaps an outside eye or an outside perspective of people who work maybe more globally. By that I mean with more people, and can I don't like standardizing things at all. completely don't think that human beings should be standardized, but actually getting a feeling of how far that adaptation's gone, and therefore that shows that there's a need there, and that need then needs to be met in other settings and other environments. I hope that sort of makes sense, really. Just to I don't feel parents are always listened to. Sometimes if the child behaves a certain way at school, the masking isn't seen, because actually the dysregulated behavior isn't seen in that setting. It's like, well, it can't be happening. And I think that idea that you were saying about all the pieces, you know, that triangle of coming together and really understanding that whole child, I think is really important.
Because children hold themselves together during the day because they have to, because it's unsafe, or they feel that they can't express themselves. And then sometimes they come home and it all comes out. It all comes out in their behaviors, and they appear to be very distressed. So families are seeing their children come home and seeing all of this distressed behavior, and it doesn't meet. So something about the communication isn't flowing. Somebody said, you know, some part of that triangle isn't able to express themselves, and often it's the child. And so I want to be able to do as much as I can to support families so that happens less. It's always going to happen to some extent. We always modify our behavior to certain contexts. That's normal. Behave differently in the supermarket than I do at the dinner party and in my own house, right? But they're not distressing to me.
No, exactly. It's about understanding and enabling and supporting, and not the compliance, not the forced compliance that then causes distress. You're absolutely right. That sense of the emotional safety not being there, and so the compliance is what we all have to comply to a certain extent, and actually those are skills for life, aren't they? But it's the balance, like you're saying, or the flow. I like the word flow. I think flow works better. Of actually, well, you know I need to adapt slightly for this, but actually, am I adapting so far that I'm feeling really deeply unsafe and uncomfortable?
So
I'm leaving the space for you to come in, Daniel, because I feel like we're going to talk too much otherwise.
So I've got a little criticism about I've got a whole shelf of parent books. I mean, there must be more than 30 books on there. And I've also encountered quite a number of parenting coaches. Myself and my wife have been to parenting coaching, and in a very sort of diligent way. But so here's my criticism about it, is that most of the stuff that we've encountered is completely unrealistic. And there's something which I think that myself and Sandra, and possibly yourself, Kate, are quite used to in the world of education. If you're training teachers, and I may be training hundreds of teachers, or over the course of a year, thousands of teachers, what you want to do is to make sure that the education is constructed in such a way that it's easily adaptable, it's easily onboardable, and that actually as a result, you can see it, and it really will happen. And so, by means of an example, we want schools around the world to become more inclusive, right? But if what that means is we're expecting already very busy teachers to do yet more, and have more stress and take more time, and it costs more money, then the answer to that is going to be no. Even if you think it's the best idea in the world, the answer is going to be no, because in reality, it ain't going to happen. And that, I think, has always been our leading light as to, well, how could we do this in a way that's bite-size, completely doable? In fact, it's easier to do than not do. And that you can even remember it in the moment. You know, when you kind of in the tug of war in the moment, you can even remember it then. So that's a very different perspective on adult education. And it's not something which some of our more well-known family therapists necessarily account for, is understanding the process of education. And so I think that's something that we definitely bring to the table. It's a very different way of thinking. Having said that, it doesn't mean to say it isn't sort of wholesome and rooted in good psychological research and so on. And perhaps I'll just mention a couple of themes which I'm interested in particular, which is about maximizing engagement and participation, but not through force, but by encouraging autonomy, encouraging cooperation, and then also being able to sort of acknowledge sometimes very intense feelings that a child may have, but also a parent may have. And not running away from those, but being able to sort of sit with them, be with them. They're okay. It's okay for my child to feel anger because he's a human being, and I don't want to sort of articulate to him that, you know, he's not allowed to have certain feelings. Of course he can have those feelings, but it's about how we be with them. And also I'm allowed to have my feelings too, you know. And to do this from quite a compassionate human perspective, I like to tell people quite a lot how flawed I am, but by means of articulating that it's not like, I mean, I think that sometimes you do get experts who like somehow they themselves are like gurus, and that they're just like, they've reached a certain level of nirvana or perfection or something, and they walk and talk with sheer perfection of how to do it. And I've never really been a fan of that. I think that's a bit of sort of gameplay or fallacy or pretense. I'm really completely the opposite. Most of the people I know are about as flawed as, you know, just basic human beings. And so coming from that angle, making things realistic and focusing very much on what works even in the moment, and it can sometimes be very intense moments. So I think that's where I'm coming from. There's I guess a lot more detail to that. I'll just do one more sort of little point, which is that there are certain ideas, such as, I'll just mention one off the top of my head, the Karpman drama triangle, which I just find it astonishing that a parent might not know that, because it's so helpful to know. And it's so almost daily for some parents. And it's such an easy thing to know, an easy thing to fix. So I'm quite excited to share with parents just some very simple ideas that can be used. And I genuinely am a bit of a cheat, because I feel like the things that I learn in the most is from just working with groups of people and the feedback that they give. And although I'm really delighted to sort of share some knowledge and ideas, I'm even more excited to sort of learn some too. And that sounds a bit sweet to say, but I mean, genuinely, when you have an idea, like for example the Karpman drama triangle, but then you talk about it with real people in real time, about real children and real families, and then it's quite interesting. You know, it becomes alive. Anyway, so well, that's my little ramble.
All right. And it's such a sweet idea that I built something called the Hive. And it's called the Hive very deliberately, because everybody who comes in brings skills, knowledge, relationship, experience, wisdom, and we share it and we cross-pollinate, and everybody learns in exchange. And then we go off and we take what we learned and we add it to a new context, and we learn something new about that context. And from there we have patterns where we can see patterns in life, and that helps us to choose behaviors that are going to be helpful to us in new situations when we can see the patterns. And that's really empowering, because big feelings are hard to sit with. You were talking about having big feelings and knowing how to deal with them. And the older we get, the more we try to avoid them. So then our lives become smaller, and we stick with the same patterns because they feel safe. And so part of this work is not about telling you which tool to use. It's about filling up your toolkit and giving you lots of opportunities to play around with them. If you want to use your hammer in lots of different places because it feels good in your hand and it gets the job done, then you can keep using your hammer for a while. And then when you feel confident, you might want to trade that up sometimes for a wrench, or maybe something a little bit more subtle. And you become more confident in using these tools in different situations, which means you can stay for longer in your discomfort, and then your discomfort becomes more manageable, and then it stops being discomfort and your life gets bigger. And for us as adults, what we're doing is self-regulating. We are managing our big feelings by using tools on ourselves. And I often say to people in trainings, you know, I bet even the Dalai Lama is, you know, like playing table football with his self-regulation. You just can't see it, right? He must wake up one morning and think, oh God, I really can't, I don't fancy doing this today. And he has to go and do his breath work, and he has to get himself into the zone to manage his life. I don't think there's any human being who's wafting through life not having big feelings and having to be able to deal with them. That really is a fact. I've met, I don't know how many human beings in my life now, and we're all managing our own stuff in our own way. And the idea of compassion and how we use it on ourselves is really key. So I guess for me, all of this really boils down to sharing knowledge, sharing experience, and sharing ideas that we can implement in a safe environment while we're together, and talk about what works and what doesn't work for you, and why do you think it works, and why did you think it didn't work? Was it the tool that you used, or was it the time that you used it, or the way that you used it, or, you know, how are we going about what we're doing, and why do we want to change up the way that we parent? Because that's the important thing, isn't it? It's like, who are we doing it for? Are we doing it for us? Are we doing it for outside? And all of these things are really important questions that we don't always feel that we can talk about, I think, in public and in forums. So I guess I want what we do together to be a space where we can really chew into the more gristly stuff of what parenting and learning can be.
I'm going to add just one thing there that I think might be, oh, I've lost you on my screen. Oh, can you still see me? Yeah. I clicked something and I've lost you all. Oh, there we go. Right. Okay. Click the wrong button there. What you were saying about being able to sort of reflect on situations, and you were saying that sometimes you might use a particular tool because that's worked for you for a period of time. For example, you know, children will often use, as will adults, avoidance, because avoidance is incredibly powerful, because in that moment, if you avoid something, then you know, the emotion or the feeling or the stress has gone. But obviously that is a tool. It's a very effective tool, but it's not necessarily the best tool to then be able to grow and develop and be brave in life. And I think the other thing I just wanted to say is that what I feel is important within this context and this way of working is that we get rid of this idea of expectation of what something should look like. So parenting should look like this, or, you know, there's that. As I find working with other people's children within my role within work far more successful in many ways than trying to do things with my own children at home, because I have that kind of extra sort of expectation on myself for what my child should be doing, or that sort of thing. And the other thing I think is really important, that the way that we work within this is that we get rid of the judgment. We're not here to judge, we're just here to be open and honest, and, you know, present things as they are, and just help to maybe shed a bit of light, to unpick, to reframe, to be curious about why, and enable how to then move forward, as you've said, being braver.
So we're going to do an in-person set of workshops here in Dominican Republic this summer in July, from July 17th. And that's advertised on our website, on the Hive Adventure website, www.thehiveadventure.com. And you're most welcome to come to that. And in the future, we're going to be looking at what we can do as a team, I guess, to be supportive to parents in different ways. So we would really love to hear from you. What are the challenges that you're facing, whether that's at home or with school or some kind of interplay between home and school, and what you feel we could be of most support with. Definitely, I find that having other people that I can talk to openly about the challenges that I am facing at home. I think it's easy for people to assume that if you run a school and if you've been learning about learning and children for however long, that you've got it all pegged, but we haven't. We're all humans trying to navigate bringing our children through from infancy to adulthood alive and healthy and well and happy, and that's never without its challenges. So I'm really interested in doing this professionally because it's work that I really enjoy, and also personally because anything that can make my journey feel safer and more enjoyable is going to be good for me too. So I don't know if you two have anything that you want to say to kind of wrap up. I don't know.
I think it'd be quite an interesting once in a lifetime experience to sort of be in such a special place as the Hive, and also to embrace the idea of learning about children in a non-formal way. So not my team and I run a master's program, for example, but it wouldn't be a master's program, but it would be a high level training, but in a sort of very human-centered way. So that might be that might appeal to certain people. That's I think could really set off something new. That's my excitement and thought about it. Sandra?
Yeah, I think the same. I think there's it's a real kind of exciting collaboration, really, opportunity to really grow together and also provide much needed support. Certainly, I'm hearing that this is an area that parents would really value support with, and if we're able to enable and facilitate that support, then from my perspective, that's what I'd love to do. So yeah, that's my bit.
Yeah. Yes, it's exciting. Having been a teacher for a long time, and I don't know anyone who goes into education who wants to make children feel unhappy or anxious or nervous or challenged. And yet that is how an increasing number of our children are feeling every day in schools. And no teacher goes into education thinking that they're going to feel anxious and stressed on a Sunday and avoidant and all of the things that teachers are going through. So somehow, in wanting what's best for children, we've wandered off the path a little bit on what's best for human beings. And we need to kind of bring back the human center and think about what's happening in our heads, yes, of course, but also what's happening in our hearts and what's kind of happening in our bodies and what's happening in our relationships to one another. So that's the bit that I'm really excited to look at too, from a very scientific perspective, what's actually happening inside our bodies, what's happening with our nervous systems, what's happening with our blood flow, also what's happening in our minds, talking about the patterns of thought that we use that can be helpful or unhelpful and shifting those up. So from a really scientific perspective and also from a really human perspective as well. So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes. Well, I'll put this video up on our YouTube channel, and I'll put links to it out on LinkedIn and through all of our social networks. And if you're interested in coming in July, just write to me and I will send you all of the details and help you figure out whether you want to come on your own or whether you want to bring your children and pop them into the hive so that they can experience that too. It's only 3 weeks away. There's not a huge amount of time, but we will make it work, I'm sure. So thank you very much for coming and chatting. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in and listening. And I'm looking forward to see where the conversation goes. Bye, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.